Hey, it's April again, a month recognized each year as Autism Awareness Month, all across the world. Did you know that, for many years, individuals with autism have continued to face many forms of inequalities, including unequal employment opportunities, which have only been heightened by the COVID-19 pandemic? This is a problem that has grown worse over time by long recognized discriminatory hiring practices and workplace environments that present major obstacles for persons with autism. The results are unemployment or severe underemployment of a large majority of adults on the autism spectrum. This year, as the world celebrates the World Autism Awareness Month of April as declared by the United Nations, the theme for 2021 is Inclusion in the Workplace, Challenges and Opportunities in a Post-Pandemic World. This aligns with the Sustainable Development Goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth, aimed at promoting full and productive employment and decent work for all, including persons with disabilities. Article 27 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities also recognizes the right of persons with disabilities to work on an equal basis with others, and to a work environment that is open, inclusive and accessible to persons with disabilities. At the Cadet Academy and the Dewdrops Community Center for Special Needs, we will continue to provide necessary support to children and young adults with autism and other disabilities to enable them grow into independent and employable adults. Now you know. So join us in spreading this message. Hey, it's April again, a month recognized each year as Autism Awareness Month, all across the world. Did you know that, for many years, individuals with autism have continued to face many forms of inequalities, including unequal employment opportunities, which have only been heightened by the COVID-19 pandemic? This is a problem that has grown worse over time by long recognized discriminatory hiring practices and workplace environments that present major obstacles for persons with autism. The results are unemployment or severe underemployment of a large majority of adults on the autism spectrum. This year, as the world celebrates the World Autism Awareness Month of April as declared by the United Nations, the theme for 2021 is Inclusion in the Workplace, Challenges and Opportunities in a Post-Pandemic World. This aligns with the Sustainable Development Goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth, aimed at promoting full and productive employment and decent work for all, including persons with disabilities. Article 27 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities also recognizes the right of persons with disabilities to work on an equal basis with others, and to a work environment that is open, inclusive and accessible to persons with disabilities. At the Cadet Academy and the Dewdrops Community Center for Special Needs, we will continue to provide necessary support to children and young adults with autism and other disabilities to enable them grow into independent and employable adults. Now you know. So join us in spreading this message.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Can we all hear me? We had a little bit of technical glitches, but I'm glad we're back on. Can you all hear me? Hello, Blessing. Hello, Vicky. And everyone joining me on the Cadet Academy website, on Lola Aneke, on Facebook, on our YouTube channel. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. So it's episode 57 of Signing Up with Special Needs, and our topic for today is benefits of employing persons with autism in the workplace. With, April is globally recognized as Autism Awareness Month in the part on everywhere in the world, like I said, globally. And this year's theme is inclusion in the workplace, challenges and opportunities in a post-pandemic world. So I want to welcome you once again to episode 57. I am Lola Aneke. I need Blessing or Ngapi or Vicky to let me know you can hear me loud and clear. So today we have three wonderful guests that will be joining us again to have this discussion on the benefits of employing persons with autism in the workplace. I need to check my chat and be sure that. Thank you for that response. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So, without much ado, I'll be inviting my guests. But before I invite them, I want to encourage us all to make sure we have a watch party on this particular video, so we can have other people watching us on different platforms. I want you to like and share, and also put down your comments. Let's know your questions so that our guests can help to answer the questions. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. So once again, I'm Lola Aneke, and I welcome you to episode 57 of Finding Up with Special Needs. So I'm going to bring in my guest. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
H- Hello.
Can you
All
hear
right.
me?
Yes.
Hello. Hello. Mr.
Hello.
Abioy, can you hear me? Mr. Paul. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Blessing, can you hear me? Vicky, can you hear me?
Yep. Yep. I can hear you. I'll put it in the
Okay,
chat.
my guest can't hear me. Hello, Mr. Paul.
Hang on.
Hello, Mr. Abioye.
Hello. Hi, I can hear you.
Am I loud and clear at your end?
Yes, loud and clear. Yeah, loud and
Hello, I can
clear.
hear you, Mr. Paul, but you're breaking. Oh,
Yeah, I
wow.
can hear you.
Mr. Abioye, can you hear me?
Sure, I can. Yes, I can. Can you hear me too?
Can you hear
I'll
me?
just check the chat and see what's going on. Okay. Okay. We are having we're having yeah, I see you can hear me, but I can hardly hear you. Mr. Abioye, can you hear me at all?
Yes. Yeah, he can hear you. We can both hear you.
Can Mr. Abioye hear me?
If you look in the comments, we can hear you.
Oh, wow. It's a bit.
Hi, Paul. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I can hear you too. Clearly. So, uh, Miss Hammond, can you hear me?
Think she's. It might be to do with the
The
line.
bandwidth. Yeah. Okay.
Ah, here they come.
Hello,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yes. Hello. Hi. Can you
Oh,
hear
it's
me?
a lot better now.
All
It's a
right.
All
lot
right.
better now. I
Okay.
wonder what went wrong, but we're going to keep our fingers crossed and hope that nothing goes
Yeah.
wrong anymore.
Right.
Okay. And if
All
for
right.
any reason, it goes off, please continue with the discussion since we have a
Right.
topic for discussion. Okay.
Mhm.
So let's do this. We had Mr. Beer with us last week, and we're glad to have him again with us today. So, Mr. Beer, could you please introduce yourself again? Then, Mr.
Oh.
Paul, please introduce yourself. I hope Miss Awa gets to join us. Yeah, let's go. Let's do this. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Aneke, and thank you for the opportunity of this platform. My name is Toye Abiri, and I'm with These Abilities Foundations, an organization that is committed to advocating the rights of persons with disabilities, with special emphasis on providing them with economic inclusion, and also jobs and work in the workplaces. Yeah.
Great.
Fantastic. Well done and welcome again.
Thank
We
you
had
for
a good
having
time
me.
with you last week, and we're hoping that it's going to be much more better today.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for having me.
Mr. Paul,
Thanks.
over to you. You're welcome. Mr. Paul, please introduce yourself to us.
Thank you. My name is Paul Isaacs. I'm based in the United Kingdom. I've been doing autism advocacy work for about 11 years. I currently work for Anna Kennedy Online, which is a charity based in London, and I currently do speaking, training, and consultancy work around the UK. I was diagnosed with autism about 10 years ago at the age of 24, and visual perceptual disorders and learning difficulties in 2012.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Um, Whenever I read my guest bio, I'm always so humbled, and that's the way I feel today. But we are so privileged to have you on the show with us. Thank you for agreeing to be with us on the show. So today we'll be talking about benefits of employing persons with autism in the workplace. And I would like to start with you, Mr. Paul Isaacs. I pray and hope that Ms. Awa is able to join us because she's also an adult living with autism, and she's done so very well for herself, you know. So I was hoping she'll tell us her story today, but while we wait for her to join in, hopefully she can. Would like to hear your story, Mr. Isaac. Reading your bio, I was wowed with all of the names and the everything that was attributed to you alone. I wonder how you were able to walk through all of that and be who you are today. And I understand you're an adult living with autism. So could you please tell us your story?
May as well start from the beginning. I was born in 1986, and my mother had a difficult birth with me. So part of my autism is brain injury. So there was hypoxia at birth. So basically, what that meant is that I had severe language processing challenges, visual perceptual challenges. So I was meaning deaf, meaning blind, context blind. So in around January 87, I was born in the May of 86. My mother initially thought I was deaf and blind, so that was nothing to do with the sensory organs. It was to do with the way my brain was interpreting and internalizing information. So the way in which I used to understand the world was externalizing to internalize. So I used to sort of lick, sniff, tap, rub. So it's very much like a deaf-blind child. Um, and the way in which I used to recognize people, well, my parents in particular was my mum was hair, so it was feeling her hair, so it's kinesthetic associative. I don't have a visual memory, so it was all tactile associative. And my dad was face, so it was sculpting his face. So when I went through mainstream school from the late 80s to the early 2000s, there was no recognition of my autism. So I didn't gain functional speech until about 7 or 8 years old. So before that, I was about 80 to 90% meaning deaf. I was meaning blind. So the way in which I used to navigate the world was through the system of association. So it was nothing to do with visuals. It was other forms of association, which I pointed out before. Ways in which I used to cope were to dissociate, frankly. So dissociation is where you remove yourself from a stressful event. It's when your nervous system can't take anymore. So even interpretive language was difficult for me in a classroom setting, if you can imagine, I wasn't able to see anything incoherent, so focus on one thing, lose everything else. And then you had to focus on the words, and the words didn't make sense. And then you focused on the blah blah, the words, and it didn't marry up with the visuals, because the visuals were meaningless. Pictures were dead. So that gives you an idea of primary school. When I got to secondary school, there was bullying and there was isolation, and I learned a lot from secondary school in reflection about how people treat others. So I hold no bitterness towards people who bullied me, because it's a frame of reference, it's gaps in knowledge, and that's how I see it. It's a learned experience. So in effect, what I was dealing with in my early years was sensory perceptual challenges, language processing, exposure anxiety, and dissociation a lot. I didn't recognize my body as a whole. So in terms of everything was just pieces internally. I didn't recognize my own face or being in mirrors, funnily enough, until I was around 16. So when I used to go into washrooms or bathrooms, I would just see this other being in front of me and wouldn't correlate that it was actually me. It was a literal reflection of me. So that was quite interesting in terms of sensory perceptual experience. So when I got to secondary school, but prior to that, I went through the child and adolescent mental health service with depression. Before that, in '93, I went to an educational psychologist, and it was inconclusive. When I went to CAMS in 1996, they recognized some difficulties but didn't diagnose it as autism. So they looked at it from the perception that it was an attachment problem, which is, funnily enough, what they used to think autism was in the 40s and 50s. They used to think it was a disorder of attachment. So at the end of secondary school, there wasn't anything academically of worth, but then that's not really what I got out of my personal experience of school. It was about learning about people. If I wasn't going to get anything educationally out of school, I was at least going to get something beneficial, which was understanding about people. So when I went to further education, that was kind of my best educational year. So that was 2002 to 2003. And it was really simple what helped me at that point. It was almost like a class but condensed. So you had tutors that could direct you in your work. It was small classroom setting, so it's about 4 or 5 students, and there was the ability to actually get feedback and actually get direction, which is what wasn't happening in the prior environments. So when I got to employment, that was around 2002, and that was around the same year I left education. And from 16 onwards, I went through various different forms of employment. There was lots of bullying and isolation in majority of my employment until I started working at an autism base in 2009, and then I started my journey as a speaker in 2010, where I did a speech for an organisation. And then in 2015, I worked for a day centre for people with autism. And now currently I'm working for Anna Kennedy as a blogger, trainer, speaker, and consultant. So that's kind of a condensed journey of my development and my road to employment.
Wow, wow. I can't even imagine. for everything. I was just wondering how you coped with the bullying, with the fact that you couldn't even process, the sensory of this is me. From the mirror, you see yourself in the mirror, and you can't associate that to that being who you are. I wonder how learning was. How I know I mean, it would have been very tough, but you know what? I'll let you take a break for a minute. Take a break, and I
Yeah.
want Mr. Abioye to just yeah, really. I can't like I would have said, you know what, take it again and let us have an experience of what you actually went through verbatim. Like tell us how it was like, how was learning for you was how was learning for you? How was the employment process and everything? I mean, interacting with your colleagues. How was it for you? And I will still get there really. But because I know that Mr. Bioye is quite an expert when it comes to employment for individuals with disability, I'm thinking, Mr. B, what's going through your mind? Haven't heard Paul's story because we know you have the answer for us, but what was going through your mind based on some of the things that Paul has said to us just now?
Right, right. No, no, thanks, and thank you very much, Paul, for sharing that experience. And one of the things I appreciate about this program is that it brings varied experiences from different backgrounds. So here, Paul talks about even the kinds of discrimination that happens even in an advanced society like that of the UK. But then we can't even compare that to what obtains in Africa or in some African countries generally. But in my mind, as Paul talked about that, about his own experience, one, I I couldn't but help compare with the system and structure that it obtains in Africa. All right, to say if he were in Africa, would he have even had an opportunity to be in any mainstream school? Would he have had an opportunity to even aspire to be a blogger or any of those things? I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think so. Maybe now, as we push the frontiers, that will happen. So that's a positive thing even to hear. So as Paul spoke about his own experience, it also clearly demonstrates that people with autism have special abilities. They have things that can benefit society, right? And there is that misunderstanding of what autism is, or is it a sin, or somebody has been cursed, or is so. All of those going through my mind as I listen to him. But then, by and large, he operates within a system that allows you, and also encouraging even to be able to say that we can aspire to that. So, but thanks very much for sharing that experience. Maybe a bit, let me backtrack a bit and say, because when we talk about autism, and then autism spectrum disorder, or autism spectrum, what exactly do we mean by autism? Because people might not even understand what it is. Somebody might see something else and label it as autism generally, but that's not it. So if we understand that autism is a developmental disorder, right? If something is disorderly, it doesn't mean that it is not functional. It's a developmental disorder of different severity. So that's the different spectrum. So, and it is usually characterized, we see that in difficulty in social interaction. So it might be difficult for that individual to engage with people, to communicate. It might be reserved, and is restricted, or by restrictive or repetitive patterns of thought and behavior. So that person has a regimented or a specific way of doing things. And we need to understand that about people, that autism, first and foremost, is not a contagious disease. It's not something that I must be scared of. Right? And because in our part of the world, what we don't understand, we tend to demonize, we tend to label and to ascribe to things like witchcraft, or there's a problem somewhere. But that does not necessarily mean that that's the situation. So, as Paul talked about his story, I think he highlighted what a normal society should be gravitating towards. It might not be perfect, no system is perfect, but it tells us that people with autism are normal people, are regular people. If there is a disorder in how they develop, it varies on different spectrum. And I'm glad that he spoke about his current engagement as a blogger. People talk about I'm a blogger everywhere, but how many of us associate that kind of profession with people living with autism. So thanks a lot, Paul, for sharing your thoughts in this regard.
That's all right.
Great, great. Wow, Paul, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. But there's something I would want you to just share with us, particularly with the aspect of employment. What was the process like for you? I haven't gone through all of that. I mean, it takes a strong person, despite all that you went through, to still go ahead into employment. What was the process like? What was your relationship with your colleagues like? And tell us your strength. What makes you stand out?
Well, it depends on what environment you're in and how you feel about yourself. That's the key. So even non-autistic people, in the first 7 years of life, you intrinsically sponge from your environment. So what I mean by that is your core beliefs are tempered by your environment. Right. So if your core beliefs are tempered by your environment and you have negative experiences in that thread of infancy, it will temper how you view yourself and the outside world. So when I was put into employment, it was to do, from my parents' perspective, of not letting me go down the road of the erosion of mental health. So it was about getting structure. So when I got to work, the relationship I had with the environment was disorientated. So all the things I was saying at school, they don't end at school; they carry on. So if I'm meaning blind and face blind and context blind, that carries on, maybe in a different presentation. So the things I was saying about simultagnosia and seeing in bits, that relates. My first job was at a supermarket. So a lot of what I'd done to map out the supermarket was about patterns of movement, direction, smell, placement, and the same with people, right? So Gestalt perception is to do with bringing the whole. And if you can't do that, so for example, prosopagnosia is face blindness, that has a 30% crossover with autism. That affects bonding. You may not look at faces. So I recognise people now in a way which may be considered more socially acceptable by the culture around me, because different cultures have different views on autism, which the gentleman quite rightfully pointed out. So, for example, in Italy, if someone isn't a hug bunny and isn't tactile, that may be considered a problem. Whereas someone in Japan, someone who is a hug bunny, who's very tactile and is hyperactive, that might be culturally considered more of a problem. So the cultural lens has just as much as impact as the development. So going back to my employment, if you're face blind, I recognise people by context. So um, uh, voices and patterns of movement, but I get ingrained. I get used to seeing them in a context. So if I see them outside of a context, it's like talking to a stranger and I'm reintroduced to them. So you can imagine the difficulties with colleagues. You can imagine the difficulties with being reintroduced. You can imagine the difficulties in the staff room, because I get flooding of information. And there's another challenge, which is what typical children get, is called the shared sense of social. And they start around 5 years old, and it can be as late as 7, 8, or 9. And it's where they can internalize and express in real time. It's called the shared sense of social. So some people on the spectrum, they can't do a simultaneous sense of self and other. So they can either do all other, no self, right? So all other and no self, or all self, no other. So they lose the thread of the shared sense of social, and that happened a lot. So that impacted on how people perceive me. So they saw it as a character flaw, yeah, because they wouldn't have known it was autism. And also I would get things wrong, like not understand, the nuances of work, the social nuances. So telling a boss maybe that he doesn't do his job properly, even though he doesn't, is probably not a good idea. And those are the sort of things that were happening, although they're slightly humorous. They had a great impact on how people perceive me at work. So the strength, really, when you talk about strength and self-awareness of having a strength, let's put it like that, didn't come until many years later, until about 2010, when I started my journey as an advocate and speaking and able to speak about these complex issues in a tangible way. Another thing I'd like to point out about how I presented myself with autism in the early years, I probably would have got diagnosed with severe or classic autism. So the higher levels of information processing challenges, you retain a system called the system of sensing. The system of sensing is where everybody comes from. So when you're born, your nervous system is naked, yeah? So you merge with people. It's called mergence, right? One lady who I spoke to, who's a psychiatrist, called it biorhythms. So these people who you work with that fit into that kind of information processing criteria, I've found, and myself included, tend to be highly introspective, highly aware of their emotional environment because they're not relying on signals. Right. So the difference there is the reason why I couldn't pick up on social signals was because of sensory perceptual challenges. Yeah. There's a different type of perceptual challenge, which is a non-verbal language processing disorder called social emotional agnosia, which is common with people with Asperger's syndrome. They don't see body language, facial expression, or tone of voice. That's a completely different system where they map things out in a logical, literal way. Whereas the other camp, see, classic autism or severe autism or whatever word you'd like to call it, isn't a low functioning version of Asperger's. It's a completely different system. And when you look at autism, you have to look at the systems. What makes up that person's autism? What are the challenges? And if you look at it from that, it's almost like being a detective. So it wasn't until 2010 that I saw that I had strength in relaying this information to schools, to charities, organizations, etc. And self-esteem, if you want to go into that area, wasn't built on false premises. Self-esteem is built on when you can get to a place where you don't care what people think about you. Because if you get to a place where you don't care what people think about you, and your happiness is an internal process rather than an external validation process, then that is the road to contentment and happiness. You can't be happy relying on people's external perception of you. So when you talk about strength, it's an employment aspect, I know, but it's also, I suppose, a self-perception aspect. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, it does, it does. And you said quite a lot. And really, I was cold again, when you were trying to explain what individuals with Asperger's syndrome and classic autism, when it comes to being able to interpret non-verbal languages. I have a very clear understanding of what Asperger syndrome is and how such individuals may not understand as little as even traffic rules, because they can't just decode what it means. And it's quite interesting for me to hear from you that kind of processing disorder is quite different from what a person with classic autism would do. It's not like this person is not does not understand it, but the way he interprets it is quite different from what a person with Asperger's syndrome is. And another profound thing you said, which I couldn't help but take note, was that when it comes to your perception of yourself or what your strength is when it has to do with the workplace, you said something very profound. You said you can't be happy based on what other people's perception of you. You have to be fulfilled and happy based on who you know and think you are. And there's something I always say to people, who define the norms? Who does really? Who says this is how it ought to be? I might say things differently. You might say things differently. The best is the best for us to do is for us to come to a common ground and have like a middle ground so that we respect one another's view. Wow, you've been so amazing, really, really amazing. Well done, well done.
Thank you.
I really wanted to Miss Sabir to tell us a few things. But while you were speaking, I just couldn't help like listening to you, and I wanted Mr. Abioye to really go into some of the benefits of employing individuals with autism in the workplace. Because when we look at it in the well, hold on, Miss Awa, are you with us? Can you hear me? Hello, Miss Awa. Can you hear me? Oh, our network is really poor today. Really, really. Okay. But if you can, just speak out and then I'll have you speak to us because I had some questions for you. I'm talking about the context of where we are and where, like you gave example of how autism is being perceived in Italy and in Asia and all of that. I would have loved Miss Awa to explain how she is coping with autism here in Nigeria and what her experiences are, because she's an individual living with autism and she's here in Nigeria. I know she has done well for herself also, and I know she's the head of I think a special needs school here in Nigeria. So it would have been nice to hear, but unfortunately the network won't let us do that today. But Mr. Abioye, I haven't heard what Mr. Paul Isaac had said to us and some of his challenges. I know based on your relationship with individuals in this part of the world, you can categorically highlight the benefits of working with individuals with autism. But before we go into that, based on what you've heard about Mr. Isaac and thinking about the part of the world he is in, what would you say, based on what we've heard today, would say were the unique qualities you were really, that stood out for you from what he has said to us? I think you're muted, sir.
Okay. All right. Yes, I am. Okay. Sorry about that. Thanks. So I'll say first is the quick acknowledgement of the need to be self-aware, to be independent of other people's opinions, and just like you said, who defines the rules, and that is very important for everyone, especially for people who live with any type of disability, particularly with autism in this case. It's very okay. I mean, being different is not an illness. We need to internalize that I am not that the fact that I'm different doesn't mean that I'm ill. I only process things in different ways, and people must. If I'm expecting people to accept me that way, that might be difficult because the only person you have control over, as Paul has shown, is yourself, and you can just determine how you respond to those things and carry on. I know it becomes more difficult when you have societal expectations that are not going along that way. But Paul has talked about a very supportive family that has helped him even to do that. So everything, most of this will stem from what kind of family system you get, how does your family perceive it, and information will help a lot. I think that even as I hear this, that information will help, that people with autism, whatever part of the spectrum they find themselves in, one is not an illness, it just means that they process things differently. And one of the key strengths of people with autism is that there is that high sense of focus. So for any employer right away, you want somebody who is committed to getting things done. And no employer anywhere in the world will say that he or she is appreciative of somebody who's not able to complete a task or get things done, right? And that's a key strength that you get from a person with autism. They don't let go. They make sure that things get done. They give you an alternative perspective. I know Paul spoke about the fact that it might not be a nice thing to say that your boss is not doing things right, generally, but you see, for people on the autism spectrum, generally, things are either black or white. and they're very known to be very factual. You speak truth directly the way it is, and that tenacity to get things done, I think, which is a big plus, because one of the things that one finds out in the course of doing leadership and management consulting work is that tasks are not completed. And on the average, you find somebody who doesn't live with autism who thinks he's better than the person who is an autistic person, but he doesn't get his job done. You still have to be
Mm-hmm.
chasing, following him up and down, and all that. And that in itself
Micromanaging.
is time consuming. So, micromanaging,
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to do that with a person with autism. So, that is one major advantage to an employer of labor, right? They're able to get things done, and that high level of attention to details, it also comes with it, right? I see Miss Hawa has gone off now. I wanted her to share her own experience
I would have
before
loved to hear
before
it.
before before I carry on. But
Okay,
if
while we wait
before
for her, I hope she comes up. Hold on. I had a question while you were speaking because I always believe that, and like you said, in the disability space in Nigeria, that there's always nothing about us without us. I would want, before you tell us, I mean, some of the points you have to share with us when it comes to benefits to the employers of labor in employing individuals with autism. I wanted I wish Miss Awa were here to talk to us about our experience, but I pray she comes back and we're able to hear her. But before you go ahead to do that, I would like Mr. Paul. So the question I had was, what tips or what ideas would you like to share with employers of labor who are thinking or who are embracing neurodiversity in the workplace? What tips, based on your own experience, like I know you have said that to be wrong for you to say like your boss is not doing something right, but you being a voice for other individuals who are on the autism spectrum or who are neurodiverse, what tips would you like? Okay, assuming your wife or your friend would like to employ an individual with autism or any form of disability, what tips would you have for them or even their other the employees? What are the things you want them to look out for in employing this individual so to appreciate who they are?
Well, it starts off with before you even get to those things of appreciation or understanding, it's all about the work ethic and the culture of work that you're going into. So
Mhm.
if it isn't right on that hurdle, nothing's going to work. So it's about the culture of work you're going into, the willingness for employment circumstances, the people working uh, in the team to understand and acknowledge these. It's education effectively. So it's the fluidity of education. So education is crucial, and it's about having an open-minded and diligent team, because the individual in question could be a model employee, absolutely, but if the culture isn't right, it's not going to work. So all those things have to happen prior. The other aspect is don't presume incompetence. So presuming incompetence affects someone's self-esteem. It's something you feel, even if it's not overtly said to you. So I can give you an example of. I'll give you an example of a friend of mine called late friend called Donna Williams, who was based in Australia, and she was on the autism spectrum, and she helped a functionally non-verbal man, and she got a phone call from the gentleman's mother saying, I would like my son to get out more, to be to be a part of the world and to be fulfilled. And fulfillment is very subjective, but I think the mother's idea was that she wanted him to pursue his own goals. So you've got objectivity and you've got autonomy, haven't you? So it's an integral part of human life, isn't it, to have purpose? So what she done is, he was functionally non-verbal. All he could say was coffee and tea. Now that wasn't a reflection of a lack of intelligence. That was a reflection of language processing challenges, right?
yeah,
So she said he could come to one of the meetups I do for people on the spectrum. He can come along. Now he'd learned a behaviour and it was learned externally, was eating socks. And his mum said, "I don't understand why he does this. It happened when he was autism based," and she got down. Donna got down on his level and basically said to him to stop eating socks. She used gestural language, very clip language, and he stopped. It was almost this moment of reflection because there's a trust there. Donna had this great energy about her. And he was in an environment where he was accepted. So that, of course, means your nervous system isn't liable to strike. And then the mother said, I would like him to be more independent. So self care, skills, self management. So Donna recommended that he get a separate space to do that. So they had a little caravan at the back of the house where he would do, ironing and cooking, etc. And then she phoned her up again and she said, well, I think he'd like to move out. And not only that, I think he'd like a job. So as you can see, this process going along, you're having someone who's there who understands that this person is of worth, who understands this person's diligence, who understands this person's intelligence. That's where it starts first, the foundations. So now, before she passed, we had a few interesting Skype sessions, and she gave me this example. And she said, now what he does, he's got his own flat and he's got his own business. I said, that is fantastic. What does he do? And she said, he's got his own business. What he does is he goes down to the secondhand shop and he sells secondhand books, and that's his business. So success is person centered, isn't it? So it all comes from how you view the person first and the culture they are going into. Right. So I could say to you, I'm a really good worker. I could say that until forever and ever, couldn't I? I could give you all the proof that I'm a good worker. But if the culture isn't right in the workplace, if there are people there who are liable to discriminate, and there's all forms of discrimination, and it could be multifaceted. So you've heard of confirmation bias and groupthink. That can be a dangerous circumstance. So it's like an echo chamber, isn't it? Well, I don't like that person because of X, Y, and Z, and then it filters. So my advice is see the person's competence, see the person's abilities, and healthily see their disabilities and their disabilities, and also have a healthy acknowledgement of their personhood, because if you think about it, there are 7 billion people on the earth, and you're all born as a human being and you die as one. So you have this healthy sense of you understand the autism profile, but you don't necessarily define them by it. So you have to almost go in the Buddhist sort of Taoist way of looking for the middle. So you understand it from a healthy, balanced view, and you also understand both their abilities and disabilities. But from my experience, one can be a good worker on the spectrum. It's about the culture first. So it's the culture of employment. It's like, for example, if you went into a workplace and gave a 2-hour talk on autism, there may be 80% who actually get what you're saying and want to do something. It's that 20% you have to worry about because they could affect someone. So it is, in effect, about building up education, building up information that is relatable, that is tangible, that crosses and builds bridges with all sorts of people in all sorts of demographics. Because, as I said, even different cultures around the world view autism differently. Autism is what it is, but it's how one views it. For example, in the Western world, the way they viewed autism in the 40s and 50s was an attachment disorder. Donna Williams, she was born in Australia in 63. She's diagnosed with childhood psychosis. That's what they thought autism was, a form of madness. Psychosis is a breakdown of reality. In the 1970s, in the 1980s, they thought it was a form of mental retardation, which is a very dated, antiquated word. It comes from the French word retard, which means slow. In the 90s, Asperger's was introduced into the diagnostic manual. In the 2000s, it became about sensory. In the 2010s, it became about gut, immune, and metabolic disorders. And now in the teens to the 20s, it's about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, tissue connectivity disorder. So the framework of autism is changing all the time. So in the next 50 years, in the next half decade, all what I'm saying will probably be arbitrary and dated. So it's all about culture of work, being educated and informed. And it's not only that, you can't force someone, but you can try your best. That's my take on it.
Oh wow, very true, very true. And while we were speaking, I took note of the fact that culture, when you're talking about what employers of labor and even the fellow employees should consider when they have individuals with autism working with them, the fact that they should consider the cultural point of view of where they are, depending on what part of the world they're in. What does the culture say about that? But most important, the fact that you say you see the person first and then recognize the strength and also appreciate the disability. But then when you recognize the strength and the disability, appreciate it from a healthy perspective, And I also like for that, even when you try to create awareness and make people understand that you might get the 80% of them to accept you for who you are, but the other 20% really matter. They do, because one little thing from those 20% could affect the other set of people. Thank you so very much for those points. Thank you so much.
And I just want to point out before I finish, there's a massive difference between appreciating someone as a human being and tolerance. Tolerance means you're putting up with someone. It's a massive difference. So I think people get those two confused. There's a massive difference between the two.
Yes, acceptance and oh wow, that is deep. Can somebody please?
I think even in our societies, and thank you so much for that, Paul. And as I just jump in, I say both the appreciation and the tolerance are two key considerations that we need to start working on in our own environment. Now, one, even before we even start about talking about even appreciating that difference, is that one, even if you need to tolerate a person with a disability, at least you've given him that space first and foremost. Then you can appreciate that person as an individual, because one of the things that we need to realize is that this is about being person-centered. We presume competence, right? We acknowledge the right to self-determination, as it were, to say, I can operate on my own as an individual. I really don't need that sympathy, as it were.
Sympathy, yes, yeah.
You need to create the space for the person to thrive. But now Paul describes a work environment or a society where, one, you're given a fair chance of even getting a space of employment. But what we need to learn from that is that as employers of labor, we need to start working on even avenues to allow people with autism to get past the gate that keeps them away from such meaningful engagement, right? Because they're not even part of that culture. The existing culture is keep them out. They don't belong here. So we need to start working with the HR practitioners, the recruiters, the training managers, the directors, managers, and all staff. And it starts from the families, because you realize there was an instance that I was involved with that the HR director of this organization has a child living with autism, but he doesn't make he's not involved in policies in his own organization where he is the HR director to support the employment of people with disabilities. But he
Wow.
takes his child out of the country to some place out of because he's able to afford it. The company pays for that. But part of the conversation was, well, here you are as the HR director of this company. Why don't you start working on the framework that allows people with disabilities? Because he himself does not even see the need to employ them. So that in itself, it's a big problem. That is somebody who is an HR director and also happens to have a child living with some form of disability. So he doesn't see the need to translate that into policies or actions that we need to do in the workplace. So we need to also start encouraging even the kinds of experiences that Paul talks about. Say, how do we create that space where one, I know tolerance might not be the right word, but at least that will probably be a significant step towards appreciation, right? So
True.
we don't have that at this point in time, but let's work towards even tolerate. Let them even be able to speak. So, for instance, when we talk with people with disability talk, do we denigrate them or do we look at it as if it's I don't have anything to benefit or to listen to from such people? And that's also part of our own tolerance level because
Yeah,
societal perceptions tells us otherwise.
yeah, that makes perfect
Wow.
sense. Yeah.
Very true. Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. You were, Paul, are you saying something?
Oh, I was agreeing with what the gentleman said. Yeah, it has to start somewhere.
It
Has
has
to.
to,
Yeah.
really. It
If
has to.
if there are gaps in knowledge, there are gaps in knowledge, and you can't necessarily completely chastise the person for not knowing something.
Absolutely.
And I think this is the way I work, particularly the fear thing about parents who have children. There can be I don't know if you're familiar with some parents go through a mourning process when their child is diagnosed. So they go through a process of mourning for the child they haven't had, because you have on a subconscious level ideas of what your child will be, and those ideas are being replaced. So it's an internal process, and some parents need help with it. They need guidance, assistance, a trusted person to talk to. So sometimes what can happen is the fear of the outside world can create a codependency.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so the fear of the outside world means that the parent will be hyper vigilant,
Mm-hmm.
looking for threats. And
Mm.
then what can happen is the person can become more disabled than they actually are, because
Yeah,
those perceived threats are
yeah.
being countered by the parent doing far too much for them, if that makes sense. Far
So,
much more, yeah. And
so rather than focus on the strengths of that individual, that's what you're saying now. So you're busy fighting fires instead of building
that's
even the
it.
building itself, right? Yeah.
That's right.
And
And
and this actually, sorry to cut you.
no, it's all
Everything
right.
just seems to be fitting in. Last week we had some parents with us who were talking about this and saying, look, most times we focus on what they cannot do, as
Yeah,
opposed to looking for the strength that will build them towards all that they need, the foundational skill towards employment in the long run. So
Mm,
that is
mm.
just everything is just adding up as you were speaking, Paul. Sorry to cut you. I needed to just keep that in.
no, it's something where the parent has to sit down, because it might be a subconscious thing. They may not be consciously aware they're doing it. And you have to deal with that quite diligently and sensitively, because there could be some deep reasons why they're doing it. They're fearful of their child growing up. They're fearful of their child potentially being ostracized. And I remember speaking to a parent after I spoke about codependency and dependent personality disorder manifesting. So dependent personality disorder is where someone lives through someone. So they're living through someone else. And the mother said it's made me think, because even now my son's 16, I still hold his hand. And it made her think, Why am I holding his hands? What's the motivation? And the motivation is fear. It's fear. I
Yeah.
need to, it's a primal thing. And I think I've seen it a few times where the parent has to be supported and understand where they're coming from. If you think about it, if as a parent you've had a lot of criticism, you may be very vigilant about professionals coming into your life, your son's life, your daughter's life. So it almost has to be, again, this culture of trust, because you can't do nothing without trust. And so trust is paramount, really, and building up cultures in foundations that are not just tokenistic. So what I mean by tokenistic is what you want to kind of slowly evolve into is you're not employing someone of a certain race, certain color, certain disability because it looks good for
Yeah.
your
Okay.
company.
Yeah.
So you tick it off and you say a certain percentage of people of different demographics are in employment. You do,
So Paul, let me. So what I hear you talk about now, again, maybe to be able to contextualize this, we need that supported independent living, right? So the
yeah,
support is, yeah, the support is good, but then it must be guided towards independent living.
Independence.
So some
Yes.
like a supported independent living system that we
Living.
need to put in place in there. And to do that, of course, trust is there. Many times we tend to think that, oh, a person with disability will make a mistake, right? Yes, they do.
yeah,
People without disabilities make mistakes too, don't
they
we?
do. Yeah,
Yeah. So what's wrong with that person making the mistake, right? And that's why the support network
yeah.
has to happen. That's why the supported independent living has to be the approach and the way, rather than just going to segregate or congregate these people into systems that restricts them from being able to actualize their potentials to the fullest.
Yeah, and
Very,
it
very, very,
also,
very strong point there. And I like the fact that, so sorry, Paul, I love this discussion really, because just keep igniting different thoughts. I remember one thing that I was very big on when I was doing my graduate program as a special needs educator was two very key things we're always told. One, when you're working with individuals with special needs, don't think of maintenance, think of independence. How do you get them
yeah,
to the next level improvement?
Yeah.
Because whether you like it or not, you will not always be there for
Oh
them.
yeah.
You will not
Yeah.
always be there.
Yeah.
Some life happens. So if you have the best of intention, don't always assume I'll always be there to guide this person. Think of, how can I make this person go through this, and I watch and step in when it's time, if I need to. And then another word we always use to explain that is scaffolding. When you want to build a house, you put all those pillars together and then you keep building and you take them out when they're able to stand. But if we
Yeah.
have that at the back of our minds, then it gives us a better future. You have high expectations for this individual, such that even when you're supporting them, you're thinking of, let me step aside and see what this person can do. Because after all, we're all looking forward to them living as much as possible, independent and productive adult life. That's what
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
everybody
You
would
you
want for any individual with
oh yeah.
autism or any form of disability.
You recall the one of the guests last week talked about her experience from the United States back and then taking it to Ghana, where she says that her son makes his bed, right? He grows up, he does the chores, he does the washing, he does his own things in there. That's because you come from a system that teaches that, and it's built into the curriculum of everyday living. So when
mm,
Paul talked about even mainstream schools, we don't have special schools, because if we're going to prepare people for place of employment, we need to start looking at the contributory factors. Because if you've put people within a segregated community, you've not helped them to live independent lives. So all of a sudden, you expect them to get a job, they're not likely to function in that space.
yeah,
So it stems from an early age. So even from those ages of 3, 4, 5, Paul talks about gaining speech fluency at the age of 7. Things happen. So we need that level of support at the family level, at the very primary school level, creche levels. So what kind of education do these people have? The people who manage these children, the people who train them, do they appreciate it, or do they just see that that child is a slow learner compared to another child? And say, oh, you're not even learning as fast. And we tend to make the mistakes and we start comparing and say, oh, but your brother was not like that. Your sister was not like that. And forgetting that, look, this child is an independent child, is an individual on his or her own. And we must encourage that. And that's why it is person-centered. So if it is person-centered, then I just look at that individual. The language around the person is focused on that individual. And I'm not trying to make that individual be like another person.
Else.
Exactly. In there. So, Miss Harman, how are you? Welcome.
Back.
Yeah.
Can you hear us, Miss Awa? Hello? Miss Awa, can you hear us? Hello? Oh dear. This is quite, I really want, yes, I think I heard you just now. Hello, Miss Awa. Oh, I heard you. Hello? Oh dear. Okay, please speak on.
Yes.
Go on. Oh. Oh dear.
It's breaking. It's breaking.
Yeah. Whatever happens, Mr. Awa has to be on this show maybe next week.
What if you put off the video and just speak? If you turn off your video and so let's see, turn off the video and just speak and see. Yeah, switch off the cam.
Did you hear that, Miss Awa? While we wait for Miss Awa and see if it will go, if you can hear our voice, let me take some comments. We're meant to go on a break, but the discussion was just getting more and more interesting. I didn't want to lose Miss Awa. But while we wait for her to sort that out, Miss Awa, can you hear me? I'll take some comments. So Vicky says, welcome everyone, good evening. What Miss Blessing's saying. Okay, let's go to some of the comments real quick. Autism is a okay, that was what Mr. Abioye said. It's a neurological disorder. Different cultures have different views of autism, according to what Mr. Paul said. When you look at autism, look at the person and not. Hello, Miss Awa, go on, please. Miss Awa? Oh,
she's dropped off now. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let me just take one or two comments and then we'll go back to this discussion so that our guests, our audience will know. Miss Awa, yeah, we can hear you. Hello? Okay. While we wait to hear you, let's take this. So Vicky Wilson Woko says, personally, I think that individuals with autism are a lot more. Speak on, Miss Awa. So while we wait for her, she said, I think individuals with autism are a lot more sincere with people in workplace.
Oh, that's very true, because there are no gray areas with people with autism generally.
Black
and that's
or white,
the makeup, right? So yeah, so they tell you the way it is, and you can they provide you with honest and sincere feedback, which is what many people in workplaces don't offer, and it helps with the work. Yeah, so it helps with work generally. Yeah.
Sure. Mrs. Grace Alexander, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us today. She says autism is a wide spectrum. People must be aware of the spectrum and must be aware of strategies of promoting inclusion in a working environment, or else some people will be marginalized. Very true.
Yeah.
She also says,
and that's part of what we're talking about, the awareness, especially not just in the, you see, when we talk about awareness at the workplace, you're talking about an HR manager or an HR director, like I said last week, somebody who's grown up without even appreciating what autism is. So we need to also bring it down to those unconscious biases that Mrs. Alexander talks about, right? Because many times, even though people try to mask them, but as Paul spoke about, and I'm glad he shared his own experience. Even though I might not see you, but I can feel it. You can tell. You can see when
Yeah.
people are discriminatory
Sure.
around you. I mean, there's, and you remember that people with autism also have higher levels of sensory skills. So you cannot hide it from them. You can't. So it's better not to
True.
have it at all if you want to
Yes.
create an inclusive environment. So it's almost like talking about a dog's sense of smell or sense of sight compared to a human being. You cannot see as much as that dog can see or smell in those things. And that's why you have the sniffer dogs. So you look at people with autism, they have higher level of sensory skills and they're able to pick those unconscious biases, which almost immediately shuts down the space of trust in that
True.
place.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
True.
mean, Paul
True.
can talk about it even from his own experience and
Yes.
tell me whether that is true or not. So it's important for us to build that so that we become comfortable. We make disability a normal conversation. There is
True.
nothing wrong. If there is a disorder, it means it's not going in the order that we know it to be. It doesn't mean that the person is ill or the person is not
True.
well.
True.
So,
True.
so employers need to understand that, and we need to also bring it back even to schools or places of education where that level of awareness can grow, as Mrs.
Society.
Alexander speaks about. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, family, everyone has a role to play. And sure, Mr. Alexander again said there is what is called conscious and unconscious biases which people do not understand, just like you just explained.
yeah,
True. Oh,
yeah,
wow. Again, Mr. Alexander says acceptance comes when you are aware and understand people's differences. Very, very true. Very,
yeah.
very true.
Yeah,
Um,
and you see, let's pause there. So when you look at that acceptance, Paul spoke about acceptance, appreciation, and tolerance. So that's what we're saying. We need to have a progression. I cannot accept what when I don't see that we're different,
understand.
and the fact that
Yeah,
we're different doesn't mean that the other person is wrong or the other
better.
person is a bad person. We're just different. And so if I
Yeah.
accept that, I can move to the space of maybe tolerance and I gradually accommodate the person. And then I can begin to appreciate the skills and the strengths that such people bring. Because if you're looking at people who pay attention to details, you will find very, very much in people with autism. If you're looking for people who are able to have logical reasoning, you will find them in the space of people with autism. And so
Autism.
any business will benefit from those skills, definitely. And they don't tend to, I mean, hardly will they drop your work and not do the work and not finish it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
these are pluses for employers that we need to also pay attention to. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take this last comment and I want to hear if Paul had anything to finish up well before, because I know we cut him at some point, and then we'll come back to you, Mr. Abiri. So Daisy Jonathan says, again, workplace must also avoid the one size fits all approach towards inclusion. Inclusion of persons on the spectrum should be approached based on the individual's specific needs and preferences. Very true, because like we all know, we've met this particular individual with autism, doesn't mean the next person or even a set of twin or triplets would not exhibit autism the same way because they come from the same womb. It's not always possible. So very true. Okay, so Daisy is sharing one more experience, because I mean it's all about everybody bringing in what they
Yeah.
know, and then we see. She said, Daisy Jonathan says, a few years ago, my husband's organization held a midday dialogue session for all staff to be addressed by a person on the spectrum who had just been employed. Wow, good job. He explained autism and how he preferred to be communicated with and included. That's a good one. We won't just assume because Paul has shared his own experience, everybody will be like Paul, or because our shared experience, every other person will be like our. It's always good to hear them and appreciate them for who they are and let them explain to you how they would like to be addressed. I remember one of the days, this was somebody else who is visually impaired. He's actually blind, And I was in school that day, and I saw him trying to cross, and I just ran, wanted to help, and I just like, I went to him and I tried to hold him, and they were like, "That's wrong." I mean, I will
Yeah.
hold you, and I didn't understand that. If I'd asked,
Yeah.
"Do you need help?" How do I do that? I wanted to
Mm,
help, thinking it's the
mhm,
right thing to do. But
mm,
I need to ask, and I need to know how it's being done, because when you do some things in the wrong way, you are doing more of a disservice than a service. So thank you
absolutely.
so much, Jonathan, Daisy, and to everyone who has contributed. So,
Mm.
Paul, is there anything you're trying to say? We're trying to finish up before Mr. Abioye comes to round up for us based on what he thinks and what he knows based on his experience and his professional point of view, what the benefit of employing individuals with autism is or are.
Me,
Sorry.
um, well, I'll reiterate the fact that it's about the culture of work. It's about the culture of the people at work. In fact, it all begins and ends with people, doesn't it? So it's work is all to do with people and how they internalize and mentalize and understand the workplace. But in a broader perspective about autism, you understand and get a healthy acknowledgement of the strengths and weaknesses. For example, some of the comments suggest that where you healthily acknowledge the disabilities and the disabilities within autism, and when it comes to employment, yes, strength based approach is good, but I think in a more sort of balanced, more egalitarian way, one must look at everything, or at least try to look at as much as possible, because it's an empowerment model which I talk about. And I urge people to research Donna Williams' fruit salad analogy of autism, because it's effectively saying it demystifies autism. It effectively says that, autism is a clustering of pre-existing conditions in both neurology and biology. And there are other factors such as personality, identity, environment, learning styles, uh, psychiatric comorbids, etc. So if one has the knowledge, then you have a potential pathway, and it's through knowledge that you create these pathways. So where I work at AKO with Anna Kennedy, that kind of all fits into place in terms of the ethos, in terms of the culture, in terms of how information is shared and explored. It's all to do with that foundation. So it's a mixture of the foundation of work and the present knowledge of autism, and then referring in that on a person-centered, non-linear, non-static perspective for the people in question.
Awesome. I'm so glad you joined us today. It had opened our eyes to different perspective, and I like the fact that it's a balanced one where we look at the strength and other factors to be able to
Yeah,
pick up and like a holistic approach, more like when
yeah.
you're talking about the individualized education plan, look at everything together and then come up with a plan that works for that individual. Thank you so much, Paul, for making that fact known to us. Over to you, Mr. Abe. I would want you to, based on your experiences and all that you've gone through, particularly because of this part of the world, what is an aid for an employer of labor if he or she has to employ an individual with autism? Miss Awa, can you hear us? We're about to round up, but it would be nice to hear your voice.
All right. Okay. So while we wait for Miss Howard, just let me know when she's ready, and then I'll just pause if within the time left.
Okay, just go
Oh,
on. Miss Awa,
so
whenever you speak on, we can hear you, we'll let you know. Mr. Abiy, please go on.
all right. Okay. So I think what I'd like to highlight as we round up on this session is that not all tasks are suitable for persons with autism, and it's important
True.
for the employer of labor to know that. So, like the example that was given by Daisy, I think earlier on about the boss or the person who was employed, who had just been employed, given the space to talk about how he wants to be interacted with and all that. So there are certain tasks that are that research and science has shown are suited where they have this unique gift. So one of which is what Paul is doing at the moment, this blogging stuff. You look at areas of software testing. So, I mean, IT, many times we tend to think that IT is that people with disabilities are not able to do IT stuff. But when it comes to software testing, people with autism are good and have exceptional skills when it comes to that. Things like data entry, things like lab work, even proofreading. So whether in a research institute or whether you're doing your assignment or a project, so those particular tasks are well suited for people with autism. And if an employer of labor is in that space or thinking of doing that post-COVID, then we need to start encouraging such people to look at the exceptional and unique skills that you'll find amongst this group of people, to say that you get the maximum benefit. And I keep saying that if you're going to charge, if I'm going to get a Paul to do your blogging or your proofreading for you, I'm going to charge you 50% more than what I'm going to charge the other person, because I know that he's got much more than what an average toy or any other person will give you.
True. You'll be more detailed because that's who they are. Most of them
Will
are.
give you much
Yes.
more. Yeah. So any task that involves paying attention to details and being focused, it's definitely an area where to look for people with autism. And when people are consulting or they need help with those regards, I mean, people can always find them. You can talk to you about them. But I think employers need to change from that unconscious bias, right? To say, I don't want to take somebody with autism because it comes from a place of fear or lack of knowledge. The knowledge gaps there are there. And so please treat every autism case as an employer or as a society as a person-centered case. Let's use a person-centered approach and support them towards independent living. Thanks.
Very, very well said and captured, Thank you so much, Mr. Abioye. Miss Awa, are you still with us? Miss Awa, you're definitely coming back on this show, probably next week. We have an interesting topic, and I think it'll be worth hearing your story and see how you can fit, whatever it is that will help our audience to see and appreciate individuals from a knowledgeable point of view. Thank you so much, Paul Isaac, Mr. Paul. Thank you so much, Mr. Abioye. To all of our audience, Ms. Inifil Ashiri, Mr. Charles Speech, everyone that's joining, Daisy Jonathan, thank you for your contribution. Joan Tiza, Mrs. Grace Alexander, Blessing Yape, for everyone, Vicky Wilson, everyone on our different various platforms. Thank you so much for always being here with us. I have learned so much. This show is all about learning, unlearning, and relearning, and it's been an eye-opening session for every episode. I've been something new for me, and I'm so thankful for all our guests for bringing the A game all the time and for being very vulnerable with us and showing us so that other people can learn how to work with individuals with disability and how to associate with them. Thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate you. Unfortunately, our sign language interpreter is unavailable today. And if you're out there, you know how to sign and you'd like to join us, please, would like to hear from you so that our other audience from the deaf community can also benefit from this discussion. Reach out to me, just send me an email, send me a DM, leave me a message on the website, wherever, and we'll reach out to you. Thank you so much, everyone. And I hope you'll be here with us again next week to learn more about individuals with autism, because the month of April is celebrated globally as Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. Thank you, everyone. It's been an awesome time. Until we come away again next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye, Mr. B. Bye-bye, Paul. Miss Awa will definitely have you again. Bye, everyone. Have a blessed week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
D-Y-S-L-E-X-I-A. He'd give anything to make it go away, even though he knows it's here to stay. But Casey won't give up, no, no, cause you know he's way too tough. He's gonna do whatever it takes. He's gonna find a way. Casey never liked school much. All the kids would laugh when he read in class. Teachers tried to help him out, but they didn't know what to do, so they just let it pass. Sometimes he wanted to scream out loud, hide his head in the sound of the clouds. D-Y-S-L-E-X-I-A. He give anything to make it go away, even though he knows it's here to stay. But Casey won't give up, no, no, cause you know he's way too tough. He's gonna do whatever it takes. He's gonna find a way.